Within the history of video games as a medium, the third-person shooter has become one of the dominant forms of gameplay and aesthetic structures in the industry. The third-person shooter as a genre begins to take shape during the fifth generation of consoles, which includes Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation. The original Tomb Raider, released in 1996, is one early title that stands out as popularizing the genre. This mix of Indiana Jones-inspired adventure and gunplay, similar to action films like Hard Boiled, was praised for its innovation in gameplay and aesthetic structures. The camera is set in a third-person perspective, where Laura is always visible to the player. This created a new experience and player engagement with puzzle solving and action-adventure shooter elements. A depiction of one of the main innovations in Tomb Raider was the player agency to equip and unequip Laura's weapons. This gameplay feature changed how the player interacted with Laura's environment to solve puzzles, traverse designed landscapes through the aesthetic system of 3D platforming, and engage with combat. In the mid-2000s, there's an important shift in the dominant gameplay and aesthetic trends of the third-person shooter. The release of Resident Evil 4 in 2005 reinvented and revitalized the third-person shooter genre completely. This title popularized an action survival trend within the gameplay structure. Aesthetically, instead of a wide-angle approach with the character framed at center, like how you view Lara in Tomb Raider, Resident Evil 4 placed the camera over the shoulder of the main character Leon S. Kennedy, which affords the player a more dynamic view of the action. An additional innovation that is instrumental to this dominant form of shooter was the introduction of the cover-based system. Games like Uncharted, Drake's Fortune, Mass Effect, and most importantly, Gears of War incorporated these tactical elements. Levels were designed with environments that featured chest-high walls so players could use them to get a tactical advantage on enemy combatants. Titles like Gears of War also introduced a grittier dark tone and aesthetic as the cover-based system became the dominant design system for the third-person shooter genre. The Max Payne franchise begins with the release of the original Max Payne by Remedy Games in 2001. The sequel, The Fall of Max Payne, releasing in 2003. The first two installments of the Max Payne trilogy are critically acclaimed third-person shooters which incorporate similar gameplay and aesthetic structures as the original Tomb Raider, like the camera center-focused on the character of Max Payne. These noir narratives take place in the cold, almost post-apocalyptic streets of a fictionalized New York City. The narrative is told through a gritty graphic novel format that engages with a meta-level form of storytelling.
I had no choice. I couldn't have waited for Mona. It was Vlad's excuse. Fate. I didn't trust myself.
Max.
I'd forgotten about the radio Mona had given me.
Max.
I'm here. Took a ride with the cleaners. I'll let you know when we get where we're going.
Max, about what happened.
Can't talk now. I couldn't crack her. I had to crack the case.
This storytelling approach is illustrated through the embedded crime show titled Address Unknown that a player can watch on strategically placed in-game television sets. The short episodes act as a reflection of the game's actual narrative, acting as a mirror, echoing Max Payne's downfall. Much like the embedded soap opera Invitation to Love from the mystery serial TV drama Twin Peaks. From a strictly gameplay perspective, the most unique part of the first two installments is the mechanic of bullet time. This gameplay structure allows the player to slow down time, similar to action movies like The Matrix, to avoid gunfire from enemy goons and give the player an advantage in overwhelming odds. Additionally, this unique structure engages with an effective experience of being an action hero as you fly through the air, blasting away thugs in slow motion. Max Payne 3, published by Rockstar Games in 2012, initially shifts its original gameplay formula by implementing the contemporary dominant gameplay structure of the third-person shooter genre, the cover-based system. On a technical level, the game itself incorporates the Euphoria physics engine to achieve an updated mechanical aesthetic depicting how bodies interact with combat and movement. These physics are implemented into Rockstar's Rage game engine, which thus far has spanned 3 console generations. With these new and still culturally relevant technical components, Max Payne 3 captures a similar affective experience to the previous titles in the franchise, while serving as an illustration of the aesthetic tensions between dominant and residual culture through both gameplay mechanics and Max as a character in a contemporary setting. This adaptation of the dominant structure of the cover-based system extends beyond gameplay and reaches into formal aesthetic structures and affect. Max Payne 3 embraces a grimy approach to the third-person shooter to serve as an oppositional force to titles like Gears of War, which embrace hegemonic gameplay values that prioritize the traditional hardcore gamer's centrality, while deliberately instilling a form of uneasiness and distorted affective element to the experience. One theoretical approach to aesthetics that embodies this illustration of the dominant in relation to the third-person shooter genre stems from Kristen Thompson's book, Breaking the Glass Armor. Thompson describes how the dominant is a formal principle that is crucial to the piece of art in relation to history and how the work is unified. The dominant can be a useful tool that can be applied to individual works, to specific authors, and even to several art modes. In relation to Max Payne 3 and the third-person shooter, the basic features of the dominant style of gameplay, like the cover-based system, are easily recognizable as a dominant element of this genre of shooter. Another important aspect of this aesthetic approach is the illustration of the tensions between systematic structures within the work. Max Payne 3 embodies this tension through the dominant gameplay mode of the cover-based system and the furthering of residual structures of this aging franchise, like bullet time. Furthermore, this tension is highlighted through the amplification of the graphic novel storytelling format. Max Payne 3's incorporation of the dominant gameplay mechanics of contemporary third-person shooters connects with Max's reflective illustration of the residual. Max Payne has aged since his last noir narrative. The updated cover-based system mixed with Max's aging tactics drive the story and gameplay forward. The shooting has a real weight to it. It's clunky, awkward, and labored in a way which reflects an older, more grizzled protagonist. This clunkiness makes it more satisfying landing accurate shots in the gunfire-addled environments. Visual feedback in the form of slow-motion kill cam emphasize the distorted affective element of this rough and labored experience. As Max shoots his way through bass-driven nightclubs and deserted soccer stadiums, the game's aesthetics distort and fragment the spaces the player has destroyed. These almost haptic affects of satisfying yet distorted and labored gunplay fade away like the feeling of wasted adrenaline as the aesthetics fragment in Max's noir voiceover begins.
I had a hole in my second favorite drinking arm, and the only way we were likely to get Fabiana back now was in installments.
This illustrates the damage this violent loss has caused Max as a character, while also leaving the player with a reflective moment fueled by a melancholic, discrete feeling aligned with Max Payne 3's oppositional approach to dominant third-person shooter values. Like in the previous installments of the franchise, Max heals himself in both gameplay and narrative through an inoculation of painkillers and whiskey. They may revitalize Max as a gameplay structure, but actually serve as harmful upon Max's health in the long term. This is illustrated thematically through the rough, labored gameplay and visual distortions. Max's dangerous cocktail also connects to Roland Barthes' theoretical framework concerning inoculation. Barthes describes how we begin a process of inoculation by acknowledging a small amount of evil produced by these institutions to create an immunity from the fundamental systemic problems that stem from these sprawling social structures. Max ingests this form of inoculation as he further dulls his senses to the evils he perceives throughout the game's narrative. Whether it be the endless lives of South Americans he takes with his violent rampage, all the while being betrayed by the bourgeois socialites he is paid to protect, or the black market organ harvesting operation funded by the paramilitary group who have also poisoned the authority of the Brazilian police force, or something as petty as his disdain for electronic house music.
This kind of place made me want to puke. I needed a real drink to deal with the electronic music and the robotic people.
Much like the inclusion of visual feedback, Max Payne 3 revitalizes the bullet time mechanic. There are many cinematic set pieces that rely on this gameplay structure to engage with chaotic, gunplay-focused experiences. This approach that highlights the rough, labored shootouts also serves as a metaphor for bullet time as what Raymond Williams describes as a residual part of culture. Williams states the residual, by definition, has been effectively formed in the past, but is still active in the cultural process, not only, and often not, all as an element of the past, but as an affective element of the present. Thus, certain experiences, meanings, and values which cannot be expressed or substantially verified in terms of the dominant culture are nevertheless lived and practiced on the basis of residue. Gameplay structures like visual feedback and bullet time that echo back to these early iterations of the third-person shooter reflect Williams' concept of the residual. They are gameplay formats that could not be expressed by a AAA developer without relying on the aging character and franchise of Max Payne. Max Payne 3's bullet time mechanic and the formal use of visual distortions and slow-motion kill cam feedback impact the experience on an effective level, all the while depicting the tensions between the dominant gameplay structure of the cover-based system. It is the residue of gaming culture past, the sticky ring left from Max's spilt whiskey tumbler. Throughout the game's narrative, Max Payne 3 incorporates optional cutscenes where Max attempts to diegetically play a stripped-down version of the otherwise non-diegetic main theme from the Max Payne series. This melancholic track has created an ambiance for Max Payne's noir narrative. These contemplative moments reflect the player and the character's affective experiences within the oppositional clash of the dominant gameplay values and mechanics and the grimy gaming culture of the past as affiliated with the Max Payne franchise. In a parallel of this oppositional clash, Max has lost his position of authority within this contemporary narrative. He's become an alienated residual subject of both dominant gameplay design and the disassociating shift of ideology in a foreign environment. The act of becoming this alienated subject, and by extension, being thrust beyond this contained world in medium, as represented by the noir graphic novel framing device, Max is illustrated even further as a form of the residual.
Another dark, rainy night. Another police station. Another futile crusade for amends. Time moves forward, and nothing changes.
As Max finally attunes his melancholic reprise within the hollow shell of a dilapidated Brazilian high-rise, Max and the player experience a moment of harmony that mediates the tension between dominant gameplay structures and the residual at work throughout this piece of interactive media.
There it was, the soundtrack to my life. And, for a few seconds, came harmony. Finally,